Operating in the Courts of Heaven by Robert Henderson, Chapter 4. Standing in Holiness. Joshua the high priest in Zechariah 3:1-7 is being accused of uncleanness and resisted by Satan. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to oppose him. And the Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire?" Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments, and was standing before the angel. Then he answered and spoke to those who stood before him, saying, "Take away the filthy garments from him." And to him he said, "See, I have removed your iniquity from you, and I will clothe you with rich robes." And I said, "Let them put a clean turban on his head." So they put a clean turban on his head, and they put the clothes on him. And the angel of the Lord stood by. Then the angel of the Lord admonished Joshua, saying, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, if you walk in my ways, and if you will keep my commands, then you shall also judge my house, and likewise have charge of my courts. I will give you places to walk among those who stand here." Zechariah 3:1-7. Satan comes to resist and accuse Joshua of uncleanness. He is resisting him because of what God needed to do through him. The purpose of God through Joshua the high priest was to rebuild and reestablish Jerusalem. The devil's tactics to stop this from happening was to bring accusations against the one that God would do it through. Our cleanliness and holiness is essential to God's will being done. Without it, Satan can stop what God will do through us with accusations. The Lord's answer to the uncleanness of Joshua was to rebuke Satan. Notice, he didn't rebuke Satan for Joshua's sake. He rebuked Satan for the sake of Jerusalem being rebuilt. Sometimes our greatest asset is what God has called us to do. When Satan was rebuked, Joshua needed to be cleaned up, or Satan would have come back and legally resisted him again. Joshua's uncleanness granted Satan the legal right to resist him and what God was doing through him. The result was that the angels began to clean him up. Then the prophet began to cleanse him as well. Notice that the angels are putting clean garments on Joshua in the spiritual atmosphere. But Zechariah the prophet then proclaims a clean turban on his head. In order to be free from any place the devil can accuse us, we need angelic and prophetic input. With these things working on Joshua's behalf, he was cleansed. Notice the result. If he would stay clean and walk righteously, he would be granted charge of the courts of the Lord, and he would judge the house of the Lord. In other words, he would be given authority in the courts of heaven to be able to render judgments that set things in order. If we are to operate in the judicial place that God has for us, we must be cleansed and purified for that operation. We are then granted authority because we have overcome the accusations of the devil and can access what is written in our book. Before we move into what happened with Peter, we need to understand the way the devil accuses us. Before Satan was cast out of heaven, he was a part of the judicial operation. Ezekiel 28:14 says that Satan, when he was Lucifer in heaven, walked on fiery stones. This is the reference to the courts of the Lord and his throne. "You were appointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones." Ezekiel 28:14. This was before his fall. He was part of the legal system of heaven. One of his jobs was to gather evidence through his walking so God could render verdicts based on it. We then see him after being cast out, still walking. Job 1:7 shows us that as Satan, he was still walking. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro to the earth and walking back and forth on it." Job 1:7. Now Satan is walking about on the earth during Job's days. But when we get to 1 Peter 1:8, we see why he is walking. "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour."